Geography 507, Geography of the Global Economy, Module 15, Part 2. We're going to build on our discussion of the changing geopolitics and look at the different ways, types, and levels that integration can and has occurred. We left off talking about perceived need by national governments to collaborate in order to become bigger players on the global scene, because of the belief that with multinational corporations and the much greater interdependency that was happening between places, that they were losing influence or control. So if you glance at this map and just briefly at the colors, you can see we've created big blocks, a much more simple map than the national boundaries. And you can see in the legend a long list of different forms of integration, of different regional trade organizations. And these go from simple to sophisticated. Now, why do it? For core countries, they're going to integrate to try to either protect or expand the existing advantages they already have. Increasing international security because of integration. If we all have our eggs in the same basket, we all are going to work towards keeping that basket stable. And also to provide access to bigger markets. Not only bigger markets for sales, but investment opportunities and access to cheap labor. So the core is interested so they can maintain their relative position. Why would the periphery want? Well, they want to do it to try to limit their dependency or reduce it, believing that if they can attract more investment potential, inflow of money will give them a chance to develop. And also with development, it puts them in the position to exploit more of their resources and get money for it, or if that resource is labor, to pursue that too. So how do we go about integrating? There are different ways to integrate. And typically we talk about formal ways that involve rules and procedures, and we have structures such as the United Nations, the European Union, GATT, which stands for the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, and the WTO, or the World Trade Organization. We also have informal ways. UN voting blocks as an example. Coalitions of interests. If you've been watching any of the news related to the Middle East, you can see who's taking what side when we talk about Syria or Iran. Different types of collaborative combining to have a bigger statement. We can have different levels of integration. Transnational, which is trying to integrate countries and country markets. And we've seen things like NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or the WTO. Or in some areas, supranational. Now this involves a commitment to a body, in effect a super government, that has powers over the member countries. Now with integration, it's not all economic, but that's the one we're going to be most interested in. But we can have economic integration, and we've mentioned the WTO. Also for us, involvement in NAFTA, and soon we can add the TPP. It could be strategic for a type, such as the NATO countries, or the ones that are Soviet related in the Warsaw Pact. It could be political as a type of integration. We mentioned UN voting blocks. It could be socio-cultural, we see with things like UNESCO, or we can have a full mixed bag when we get very sophisticated in terms of what all gets integrated with something like the European Union. Now we're most concerned with the economic integration schemes for this class. Within the capitalist world, mainly we've seen the creation of something called GATT, General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade. And this is encouraging countries to follow rules. Now it involves most of the capitalist world trading nations, certainly at the time. It's trying to promote worldwide free trade. It tries to untangle the existing complex trade restrictions that came out of the first half of the 1900s, when we saw much greater protectionism being put in place. And one of the main goals, tying back to promoting more trade, is it's looking to reduce tariffs, reduce taxes in effect on imports, reducing tariffs to stimulate trade. And it had significant effect. We can see in this graph from 1940 down to 1995 a dramatic reduction in the average tariff percentage. That gives opportunity for countries to take advantage of their comparative advantage, and of course it's going to integrate economies to a greater extent. Now, who gets this advantage of reduced tariffs? Article 1 says each member country shall extend most favored status to all other member countries. So if you're not part of the group, if you're not a member of GATT, you don't get the agreed upon tariff reduction. Now this was modified in 1971 when we really start to get the emergence of our serious less developed country problems. And in an attempt to help them, they allowed less developed country to less developed country linkages to be considered separate. So they could cut each other bigger breaks. But of course, knowing the nature of trade, how it's raw material based, how little is going out that's not similar, this hasn't had a huge impact. Now in 1994, we're going to get Article 24. And this says that members of free trade associations and customs unions are exempt. So, Canada, United States, Mexico, part of NAFTA, which is going to start January 1995, they can get each other better breaks on agreed items that does not have to be extended to the other members of the GATT community. Now, GATT really becomes a victim of its own success. As more and more and more countries joined, and the world economy became increasingly interdependent and global, it meant trade issues became much more complex. The original GATT agreement dealt mainly with trade in manufactured goods, and that trade was mainly between developed countries. By 1990, trade in manufactured goods accounted for about 60%, way down from what it had been, because we've got a rise in the service sector and we've got a rise in capital investment. Further, GATT was a between-country agreement. Now, foreign direct investment is not done by countries, it's done by different investment houses and multinational corporations. They're not covered by GATT. So this really complicated the picture on trying to figure out appropriate rules. To give you an example, early rounds of renegotiations of rules for GATT might take a few months. The most recent round of renegotiation, which took place in Uruguay, called the Uruguay round, started in 1986 and didn't end until December 1993. So 8 years of negotiation. That said, the crowning achievement is going to be the creation of the WTO, or the World Trade Organization. This replaced GATT starting January 1st, 1995. GATT did not have the ability to enforce its decisions. It was a set of rules and countries had to play by the rules. If they didn't, well, then we had a problem. But the WTO is different in that regard. First, it operates a system of trade rules aimed at opening trade. That's kind of similar to GATT, only obviously it goes farther past manufactured goods. It covers goods, services, investments, even intellectual property. if you belong to the WTO, you recognize it as, in some ways, a court. It has judicial and regulatory power to make sure everyone plays appropriately. In effect, it's trying to write a legal constitution for a single global economy. It deals with 97% of all world trade in all items. So in many ways, it is our superpower. Now this is a map from 2016. Currently, all the member countries are in dark green. Gray countries, or you can find a little bit of red, those ones are not on the horizon for membership. The other countries that are not green are in the process of serving as observer countries or having partial relationships. So you can see it's huge. When this got started in January 1995, there were 76 member countries and 50 observer countries. As of January of 2016, 162 member countries, 22 observer countries, so we're up to 184. There's 196 countries in the world if you include Taiwan. So this is really the dominant structure for the integration of the global economy today.